in listen-only mode.
Good morning for those from the West Coast. Good afternoon from the East Coast. Welcome to our webinar. Those of you joining us across North America. This is step 6 in our series of 10. So we're really forging away here, and love to see so many of you out there today. Let's get started. So our topic today is money, 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 money. And as I mentioned, it's step 6 in our series. We'll just cover off our logistics. Your host for today, as always, myself, David Donaldson, as well as on support we have the awesome Lauren Connor, who's been doing a fabulous job over these seminars. So if anyone has any technical issues or difficulties, just type a note into the comments box or fire Lauren an email. It'll be lauren.connor@titleshift.ca. Keeping in mind the sound, sometimes the sound gets a little bit out of sync with the video, so just give it a few moments to catch up. We find that when it first starts off, it gets a little out of sync sometimes. And as always, we are recording this, so we can provide you with the recording afterwards. So anyone who missed it, or if you're having difficulty connecting right now, you can always connect in later. As a reminder, our control panel, there's a red arrow at the top, which you can collapse it down. So if you're a little bit challenged for real estate on your screen, you can collapse it down. Click the same arrow, it'll pop back out. And that'll give you access to the chat window and so forth. There's a question box, little blue icon there. Just click on that, it'll bring up your question box. You can type in any questions, and then Lauren will monitor those and bring them to my attention as we go through. As much as possible, I like to make these sessions interactive. So if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to drop a line. Also, if you have any questions or thoughts after the seminar is over, please feel free to give us a call or drop us an email, and we'll happily do what we can. And then the final icon is the little hands up. So if you're having any difficulties, if you want to raise your hand, and then as I said, Lauren will step in and help out with any technical issues as much as possible. All right, so let's get started. Oh, right, sorry, forgot. One last thing, our little icon for when we're doing a question or a poll, so when I'm eliciting or asking for your input, that icon will appear on screen. As is our format, we're going to start off with our opening thought. And when I first started putting this series of 10 webinars together, and I decided to use that format of the opening thought quotation, I thought, I've got to have one from Yogi. So here's our great Yogi Berra, and a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. This is going to kind of be our theme for today. I mean, it's all about money, but really I want to look beyond just the surface and kind of more talk about, what is the real value of money, and what are we looking at there from a project perspective, and posing that question: are we getting a return on our investment? So we often spend money within our projects to enhance the project, to make it better, but are we getting that return anymore? Hence, a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. And it's funny, as I'm preparing for this just a couple days ago, I ran into a perfect example of this. My wife and I are actually organizing a small charity event for our local CSA, and she had this really cool promotional idea. I got all very excited about it and started researching it and everything, and then kind of stepped back and said, we're about to spend $100 on promotion. Are we going to get a return on that? Would we be better to just take that $100 and hand it over to the CSA as part of the fundraising? Because if we're not going to be generating more than $100 on that return, then it doesn't make sense to put that extra value, that extra money into the budget of our little project here. And I really want to kind of keep that sort of the top of mind as we work through our session today. We're going to revisit again the challenges from our first session. So in our first session, if you remember, for those of you who were there, for those of you who weren't, what we did is we asked a simple question: what makes your project's challenges? What are the big challenges that you face in your project? And we boiled it down to this list: scope creep, communications, multiple people site communications, nailing down requirements, getting support from senior management, people conflicts, getting the team to understand the scope, time constraints, and sticking with the previous decisions. So with each session, we're looking at, for this step, which of the challenges are really going to come to the forefront here and that we can use to address. So here's what we decide on for this one. Looking at nailing down the requirements. As those requirements change, if we don't have those nailed down, we really can't properly estimate and budget. Getting the support from our senior management. We're constantly fighting with senior management, and I hate to use the word fighting, but it feels that way, to get support from them, to get money, to get resources, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on that as we go. And then sticking with the previous decision, so having those decisions changing, and that really kind of ties back to the first one of nailing down the requirements. And as we go through our session today, we'll talk a little bit about how these impact on the dollar side. Step 6, generating our cost estimate. So just to revisit our 10-step process, we're actually past the midway point. Yay! We're 3 more steps, well, this one and 2 more to finish up the planning piece, then we'll get into execution, and then finally closing. What's interesting, though, is I just want you to take a quick note of where generate the cost estimates is in the process flow. We very often start out our projects by asking that first question of what's the budget. And I want to go into a little bit of detail on that in just a moment. But just before we do, I'm just going to ask you this question. I'm going to give you an investment opportunity. So you've been asked to invest $100,000 over the next year, and there's an undetermined return. So they're kind of a little bit vague, not really sure on the return. And based on history, that investment is likely to grow to over $150,000 while the returns diminish, so with diminishing returns. So initial $100,000 investment, we're expecting it to grow by at least 50%, and diminishing returns. So my question very simply is, would you invest? So Lauren will bring up our poll. It's a simple yes, no. So the poll is now open. All right. Progressing, 47% have voted. 53% have voted. 66%. So we'll wait till we get about 75–80%, and then we'll close down the poll. Seeing some very interesting results. This is surprising. I was not expecting that. Huh. Now, oh, you know what? I'm just thinking of my wording. The investment will grow. The cost of the investment will grow to $150,000, not the return. So it's not you're going to put in $100,000 and then it's going to expand to $150,000. I think I might have said that wrong. All right, let's give you a few more moments to just maybe change your minds. Nope. Okay. So we got 69% saying yes, 31% saying no. I was expecting that to be the other way around, actually. So I'm just kind of wondering if that was a little bit misunderstood or misleading. All right. So the scenario I was trying to set up here was one of we're running a project. The initial budget on the project was $100,000, and then it grows over time, the budget, and we get diminishing returns after that. Okay. So to put this in perspective, your project is an investment. So when you go to your boss, to your senior management team, to your PMO, and you say, we want to run this project, here's how much we're estimating it's going to cost. What you're effectively doing is you're asking the organization to invest their money, money and time. And of course, anytime you approach anyone for an investment, the question always comes back of what's the return. Okay, so it's a very poor business for me to invest money and not get a return on that investment, and that return can take many different forms. And this is where, as project managers, as making those decisions, we're often very challenged, because unless we're in a for-profit scenario and the project the deliverable out of the project is actually a product that's going to generate revenue, it can often be very difficult to make that calculation of how much it's going to cost and what's going to be that return. So we want to think in terms of the project is the investment, the benefit is a return on the investment. And I always ask this question. I didn't bother to put this one up as a poll question because so far I've got a shutout. I ask people, do you have unlimited resources? And the plain answer is no, we don't have unlimited resources. So we're always trying to balance that off and find, what's the right balance. between the amount of resources we actually have, as well as the what's our return on that investment. Okay, so our next question, I'm going to ask two quick questions, and then I'm going to we're going to take both of those up together. Okay, so the first question is define the word estimate. So define the word estimate. So you're going to type in the it's in the question box. Okay, so we're starting to see some answers come in. I'm seeing beautiful, love it, Franca, thank you for that first one. One's best guess. Sarah says an informed guess. Beautiful. So building on that first answer, an informed guess, approximate total. It is an approximate. Thanks, Ray. Absolutely. Projected outcome from Lori. Yes, absolutely. Rough calculation from Nicole. So we're seeing a lot of, it's a guess. There's an approximate nature to it. Absolutely. Based on known variables. Best guess again. Sharon says, guess based on possible past experiences. Absolutely. We would definitely want to base it on something. Appropriate cost of the project based on the known scope and known risks from Peter. Yes, so we're really starting to tighten that down. Guess based on assumptions and available facts and previous experience from Elizabeth. Beautiful. Love it. Yeah, you guys are all hitting it right on the nose here. Estimate based on known cost and experience. It's interesting. The word estimate, everyone always goes back to price, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that as we go. Okay, so let's pop up the second question, which is, there we go, back on focus. Define budget. So we've just defined an estimate. Now I want to define a budget. So define the word budget. Okay. Lorraine, total funds available, allocated dollars from Roberta to execute and deliver the project. Beautiful. Yep, absolutely. Available or approved financial resources, amount that you estimate you will spend from Tanya. Oh, it'd be nice if it was that. Unfortunately, it's not, and especially in the real world. And we're going to talk about that, Tanya, because you're actually right on where we should be. And unfortunately, a lot of times we're not quite there. Available funds to the budget from Mahesh, funding resources, etc. for your project from Darcy. Thank you so much. Yep. Approved money to spend from Sharon. Absolutely. Yeah, these are coming in fast and furious. Fabulous. All right. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. So we're hitting around those same things, but notice a few of them are things like the cost expectations, what we think we're going to spend, and so forth. So the two words, and this is why I like to define them both, is that the word estimate and budget are often kind of interchanged and a little bit confused. So here's my definitions. First, estimate. It's a realistic prediction of what you think will actually happen. Okay. Keywords here. It's a prediction and the word actually. Okay, so we want to be, when we're doing our estimates, we're predicting the future, right? We're looking out and saying, okay, based on our history, based on our experience, based on our assumptions, based on our risk analysis, based on the details, the data that we have today, what do we think it's going to cost? But I really want to highlight that word actually. So this should really be a realistic prediction of what we think it actually will happen. And a budget, on the other hand, is how much you are allowed or approved to spend. And notice we've taken away the word actually, the words realistic, the words prediction. It's none of that. A budget, truly in its barest sense, is simply how much you are allowed to spend. Okay. Now, ideally, and we saw that in a couple of the answers, ideally, the budget should be based on the estimate. But oftentimes, we start our projects with with the budget first and then the estimate second. And dollars or days, it doesn't matter. They're both the same, right? So it's just a question of the currency that we're estimating. How many people do we need? Well, there's an estimate. How many days is it going to take? There's an estimate. How much is it going to cost? There's an estimate. Now, with that all in mind, I want to take a look at a progression here. And the progression goes like this. And we've actually seen this over the last 5 webinars. The first thing we want to define is what is the need. This is really our starting point for managing any project. What is the need? Why are we here? That leads to the scope. So what is the thing that's going to address that need, which then hence leads to the work? What work do we need to create the thing that's going to address the need? Which resources are going to do the work which will create the thing that will address the need? And then finally, now we can start to estimate how long is it going to take based on those resources. So if we have 2 different resources, you know, if we get Malcolm on the job or Joe on the job, you know, we're going to have 2 different amounts of time or 2 different amounts of work of how long it's going to take. And then, of course, that leads to our budget because we pay people for work. We don't pay people for the thing that they create. We pay them for the work that goes into creating that thing. Now, you can say, well, hold on a second here. I buy things all the time and I pay for the thing. Yes, you do. And what's the price based on? It's based on the work that went into it. So, you know, to kind of simplify it down a little bit, but the fact is, when we start a project, often the first 2 questions are, well, what thing are we building, and how much is it going to cost, right? And you know, we need to really start at that need first, go through the scope, resources, and so on. Let's do a quick reality check here. Fact is, folks, we often are in a scenario where we don't have the budget, we don't have the money. So we're often starting with that constraint. But what I'm recommending for you today is that you start with the need, you go to the scope, you go to the work, you go to the resources, you do an estimate, a realistic estimate. Then you take a look at that estimate and you compare it to the available funds and start your negotiation. I've been amazed the number of times I've gone back and said, you know what, we can't do this for that amount of money, and more money appears out of the woodwork. So, you know, have that conversation, because the worst that's going to happen is you're going to say, nope, there's no more money, but now at least we're having an open, honest communication. Okay, so our next poll, what are the key factors that cause projects to go over budget? And we're going to give you a few options here, and you can actually pick more than one on this poll. So if you see 2 of them or 3 of them that you're going like, yeah, these are really the key factors, you know, feel free to click off a couple. Remember, we're looking for the key factors, because the factors I put up there are all ones that I see as ones that do cause it. But let's try to narrow it down to just the, you know, what are the key ones. Okay, 30% voted, 35, coming in fast and furious. This is awesome. 60%. We'll go up to about 75, 80%, and then we'll call it there. 73%. Just wait for 1 or 2 more. All right. So we're about almost there's 80%. Ooh, 82. Awesome. Okay, so let's see the results. Wow, quite the divide. So we take a quick look here, and we got 50% saying scope creep, poor scope definition, changing scope. Those are all in the 50% range. Now, because you're able to choose more than one, that's why we've got more than 100% total. 45 poor estimates, and then 25 unrealistic expectations or constraints. Love it. This is actually really good. Yeah, I was trying to put together a list, and I'm looking at these. I was looking at them going, I'm going to have a really hard time kind of, dividing them. And I'm noticing that the scope creep, poor scope definition, and changing requirements, which are all things that make your project morph and change over time, are really kind of the key factors. Now, I'm just going to challenge that back just a little bit for a moment. So in our second session, when we went into depth on scope, we defined the difference between scope creep and scope change. And we define that as scope creep is an unauthorized change, and scope change is an authorized change. So hence, if you start your project at our $100,000, and then you have a serious change, and you get an approval for that change, and your new budget is now $150,000, when you finish your project at $150,000, you're not over budget. You're actually on budget. So scope creep in its truest form, yes, definitely causes you to go over budget because these are changes that were not authorized. Poor scope definition can definitely cause things to grow, but again, how you manage it, assuming that you have gotten that permission, assuming you have gotten that approval for those changes, then you actually are delivering on budget. And then, of course, the changing requirements can fall into that same definition. Now, poor scope definition, changing requirements, those both can drive scope creep. It really now starts to go back to the whole concept of how do you manage your scope and how do you manage those changes, and hence that directly, as we saw in the progression earlier, that directly connects to the budget and the dollars. Uh-oh. I'm going to pause here for just a second because I forgot to plug in my power. So just give me 30 seconds. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. We do all this setup and we go off into an office to make it nice and quiet. And I did everything but plug my laptop into power, and it's just about to run out of battery. Okay, so we'll close up that poll. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. So our next question for you, and we're going to do this through the question box, is what can we do about it? So what are some of the things that maybe you have done or you've maybe thought about or read about that would be a good practice for dealing with this whole budget thing and keeping our projects on budget? So we'll bring that question up, and if you can answer in the question boxes. Okay, starting to get some answers in. Funding approved for any additional project required, we will need to go through change requests. Yep, absolutely, Clara. If for larger contingency, oh, so that one just jumped off the screen there. Let me just scroll back up here. Allow for larger contingency if possible from Tanya, absolutely. And we're going to go into a little bit of detail on that in a moment, Tanya, because that's a really good point. And that whole contingency discussion, we're going to go into, that's our whole discussion for step 7 when we talk about risk. Implement proper change policy from Ron, absolutely, Ron. Again, if we can arrive at the end with approved changes, then as much as our budget might have grown, we're still on budget. Beautiful. Continually monitor expenditures. Yes, Justin, absolutely. Oh, love it, Beth. Thank you. Get a signed charter. So key. This is the foundation. This is the start. So yeah, definitely. Okay, so there's a question from Sarah here. Doesn't scope definition inform all the other elements? Yes, I would totally agree with that. If well defined, limits the chances of scope creep and allows best estimates to be made for scope clear. Yes, totally agree. Scope definition, exactly, and thank you, Sarah. Yes, this is why I put that progression in, and as I was going through this, it's like I want to really think about, what can we do, what can we talk about today for our hour that's really going to help you get something that's going to help, tighten that down for you. So if you are in an environment where you are finding it challenging to get that cost under control, one of the first places to look is scope. And if you can get that really well nailed down, it's going to be a big help. All right, let's take a quick look. Change management. Oh, I love it, Mash. Yeah. Oh, sorry, change. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I read change management as opposed as like change the managers, change your senior management. Yeah, so change management. Yes, so absolutely yes, and make sure that you can get adjusted. And another one from Beth is get a budget range. Yes, we didn't really talk about this when we were talking about our estimates, but your estimates should all be a range, a plus or minus. Again, it's a prediction, and you used words to describe that in your answers. You're like, it's an approximate estimate. It's the best guess. It's based on information we have now. So especially at the early part of the project, it's going to be very wide range. It's kind of a bit of a guess. As we get more detail and such, we can tighten that down. Beautiful. Yes, from Bill. PMs need to be anal about charter scope. Absolutely. And it's, as PMs, we often get kind of sometimes a little bit of a bad rap being, being anal, for lack of a better term. But yeah, it is key. It is absolutely key. And I love the one from Ramesh here, set the ground rules, all about managing those expectations. Yeah, some fabulous answers here, guys. It's really about figuring out what the heck it is we're going to be delivering and then sticking to that and still being flexible for that change, but you need to do it in a way that is open and honest and communicated and very importantly approved, because we're talking about spending the organization's money. And in effect, what we've done as a PM when we start into a project that has now been baselined is we have signed a contract, an agreement with the organization to deliver X for this amount of money and this amount of time. And if that's going to change, we need to update the contract. I mean, this would be akin to hiring a contractor to build your back deck, and they just arbitrarily change the design, the price, and the timeline without consulting you and getting your approval. So we need to really kind of keep that in mind. And scope creep, as much as it can be really, really friggin' annoying from our perspective as PMs, it's not malicious. It's not mean. It's really all about people are wanting to deliver the best product that they can, and if they're finding something that's not working, or maybe there's an additional enhancement or new feature function capability, and they think, hey, we should add this in, this will be awesome. Great, let's do that. Let's encourage that, but let's also manage it. Okay, so some great answers here. And one just came in from Kim. Keep management in the loop while project development stages so that you can produce as an. Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to that whole communication piece, right? Yes, and not have an abundance of modifications. Yeah, and we do need to temper that a little bit with what is the realistic of our situation. So I just want to take that and connect it back to our contingency comment earlier. I want you to think about the type of projects that you deal with. And in that, as you think about that, I want to ask this very simple question. How innovative are they? Are you doing something, first time in the history of man? Or are you doing something that has been done, thousands of times over and you've got a good experienced team? So this is going to be a very big factor for really defining how much flexibility you're going to need to consider. And by this, what I mean is if we're doing something that we've done thousands of times over, we've got a really experienced team, we know the pitfalls, we know where the bear traps are, we know what the steps are. We can be very tight and definitive on our estimates and then hence really deliver on budget. If we're doing an R&D type project, if we're doing something that is, we're trying to invent cold fusion or human-powered helicopter flight or, something wacky like that, and we're trying to do this and it's never been done before, we're breaking new ground here. We're really, we're not really sure. So we're going to have a greater variance or a greater range when we talk about that whole, what is your estimate levels, what's that confidence factor and how definitive are they? So, we kind of want to be realistic about that. And that's why you often see the R&D type projects especially, and we do this with large projects as well, as you divide them out into multiple phases, and the first phase might just be some research. Let's figure out the first step, and then with what we've learned from that, we're going to move to the next step, and so on and so on. Okay. So for this next piece, what I want you to put on your senior manager hat. And here's your context. You have $500,000 for projects. Which ones would you choose? Now I'm just going to walk you through this table here. And the reason that I put this in is because I want to think in terms of kind of that bigger, broader context. As PMs, we feel like we often get the short end of the stick. And by this, what I mean is, we've got our project, and our project's very important, of course, because otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. But then, we're not getting the budget that we want. We're not getting the timelines that we want. We're always struggling for resources. So we're going to kind of take this up a level, look at this from a senior management perspective. And here's what senior managers face, or senior management team faces. They're looking at the project world within your organization as a whole. And by that what I mean is you have, in larger organizations, you might have a couple hundred projects, maybe even a couple thousand projects in flight. But you've also got a few hundred or a few thousand more in the wings that are not being funded, that are not being done because, honestly, we simply don't have the resources, right? So this is, I call it the Porsche syndrome, right? I have 2 cars, I live out in the country, there's no public transit, so we have to always maintain 2 cars because if one breaks down, so the reality is I'd love to have a Porsche, but what I need is I need 2 reliable commuter cars. So if I had more resources, I'd have my Porsche, I'd have my 3rd car, but I don't. So I sort of have to pick and choose, and unfortunately it's the play. So you pick the work first. So let's take a look at what we've got here. So here's our scenario for this context. You have $500,000 for projects. In front of us we have 6 projects, and if we just simply add up the investment column, you'll see that it's well above the $500,000. So we need to choose which projects we're going to fund. Now, the PV of cash inflows column, that's present value of cash inflows. So basically what we've done is we've done some very fancy calculations in the background here. We've basically said for project A, we're going to invest $140,000 based on present value. So hence, if we get this cash flow back over the next 5 years, we're adjusting for inflation and cost of money and all that kind of stuff. We're gonna say, just for the purpose of our discussion, that we're going to get $224,000 back, and then the net present value is basically taking the investment and the PV and subtracting the investment from it. So we're really saying what's our net, and of course anything in brackets is negative. So the question is, which projects would you select? And let me just give you a quick little start on this. Project E is definitely out because you notice what you're doing is you're losing $4,000. So here I'm asking for an $80,000 investment. I'm only going to return $76,000 worth of return, so you know what, that one's out the door right off. So I'd like you to take your $500,000 and invest it. Tell me which project or projects you would run, and just go into your question box and type in your response there. So just click on the question area. So we're not going to actually bring the thing up. Okay, so we're getting some answers in. So I got Paul saying A and B. I've got Karen saying A, B, and D. A, B, and F. B, A, B. Seeing lots of A's and B's. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So for those of you saying A and B, 100%. Absolutely. Now let's take a quick look at those. The first one I would actually pick would be B. And it's really simple, folks. It's got the biggest return on the investment. So of all of the net present values, that one's the highest. Okay. Now, I then take a look at what will be the next amount. Well, most of you are saying A and B, or A, B, and F, and A, B, and C, and A, B, and something. So totally agree. Next one will be A, right? Again, 90,000 on my return for B, 84,000 return on my A. So basically, that's how much extra money I'm going to get back after I've recovered my investment, right? Beautiful. Now, a couple of you said A, B, and D. I think there was an A, B, and C in there as well. And while those have good return on your investments, because if I take a look just in the net present value column, 76,000 is the next largest number, there's a little bit of a problem. You've only got 500,000. So having funded projects A and B, I've spent 340, which means I've only got 160 left. So those of you who said A, B, and F, yep, that's your answer, right? Because what we're looking at is I want to spend as much money as I can. I want to invest as much money as I can, because if I just take that 500,000 and just leave it in the bank, or put it under my mattress, I'm not getting any return. So the more money I can invest, the more I can get a return. Now, this brings up a very interesting concept when we talk in terms of estimating and contingency funds and, for lack of a better term, and it's a bit of a dirty word in project world, but padding. So this is why we do not want to pad our budgets. The utopia of project management is that I'm going to estimate my project is going to be 200,000, and then I'm going to deliver my project at 200,000. Now, you look at that and say, okay, so going over budget's bad. I think everyone's on board with that. But also going under budget's also bad. And the reason for that is, let's say for that scenario, I estimated 200,000, I delivered at 150. What I've just done is I've tied up $50,000 worth of the organization's resources that could have been out there making money. I've tied it up, and they were unable to leverage that and get a return. Okay, so you really want to, you know, as much as possible. Now, having said that, if you get a opportunity to save money, then yes, totally take it. But if you overestimate what you're doing and then deliver under just so that you know you look good on the books, you're actually doing a big disservice to your organization. So you want to kind of avoid that. So let's put this into the larger context of life cycle costing, and we're going to just draw out a quick little chart here. On our y-axis, we've got money flow, and on our x-axis, we've got time. Now, we're going to add, first of all, a zero line through the middle of this. And basically what I'm looking at is a positive cash flow versus a negative cash flow. So we're going to start with kind of a net zero. So we're at this particular level, and if we go negative, what we're doing is we're spending money. If we go positive, we're now bringing money in or getting a return. With that in mind, the curve is going to look something like this. Now, we're going to initially spend money, so we're investing. Then we're going to gain money back, so we're getting the return. We'll eventually hit our break-even point where we cross the zero line, and then hopefully we go into the positives, which means we've actually made some profit. So that first initial down is the project. And if you think about this, what do we do during projects? We spend money, right? We use it to create product systems or resources that will eventually pay us something back, okay? So we spend that money, and once we stop spending the money, the curve stops going down. Okay, so that kind of signals the end of our project. We then get into what's referred to as the payback period, and this is the period where our resulting product is now starting to make us money back. So let's say we're going to create a new product. We're going to create the next generation widget. So we spend 6 months a year spending money, and hence our curve goes down. And let's say we spend $1 million. Now we start selling these widgets to our customers, and we start making money back. So we now have to sell $1 million worth of widgets before we hit that break-even point. And of course, I'm using simplified numbers here because there's lots of factors that are going to be involved, because we actually want to look at net profit versus gross profit, and time over money, and cost of money over time, and those sorts of factors. But so we're just kind of looking at a simplified version. So we spend money through the project. We stop spending money. We've now got the product into production. We're selling it. We're using it. Whatever that looks like, and we start earning back. Now, hopefully, we have crossed the zero line, and we're actually now into profit. So, using our simplified numbers, we spent $1 million on the project. The first $1 million of profit is just used to fund the project. The second and third $1 million of profit are now actually profit that we can actually have some benefit on. You notice a bit of a downturn near the end of the curve, and really that's usually comes into play when the product is nearing retirement. And what we're looking at is, there we go. Well, the product is nearing retirement, and what we're looking at is the product often is nearing the end of its life cycle, so it is no longer as efficient. If we're looking at a piece of equipment, oftentimes the justification for replacing a piece of equipment is that it's breaking down and the maintenance fees are getting too high, things like that. Depending upon what this looks like, we often have decommissioning costs. So if I was looking at, say, a financial industry scenario where we had a product, well, I now need to transition customers off of that product onto its replacement. I need to transition users onto the new system, or whatever that looks like. So we started out with an idea. From that idea, we launched it into a project. We spent a bunch of money. We earned money back, and then eventually we retire it. And there's just a little nuance I just want to point out on this chart just before you move on to the next piece, which is you notice that we've actually started spending money slightly before the line that designates the project has started. And this is a very common scenario. Someone has this great idea, hey, let's do X. And before you actually formally launch a project to do X, you might do a bit of research, or you might spend a little bit of funds to kind of figure out, is this a good idea? Should we, invest a little bit to research the idea? And this is really what that initiating phase of our project is really all about. So we kind of have a little bit of a blurry line there. Okay. So what can we do about it? Number one, establish priorities. And what we're talking about here is, where do the priorities lie? Is it time? Is it cost? Is it scope quality? Is it risk? And again, I use the simplified example of Y2K, which I know it's a little bit of a dated example now, but it still works. So, in the Y2K type scenarios, and we still see these happening often in a regulatory sense, where time is the number one factor. And if time's my number one factor, well, now I move down to my second bullet and I manage my expectations. So it becomes a question of, if you want to deliver this on time, well, we need to put this amount of dollars to it. And really, it's about trying to find that appropriate balance. And you want to ask yourself, what is the number one expectation or priority, and then how do we manage that? And if time or scope or risk outweigh cost, then we want to definitely manage the expectations around this project is expected to go over cost for those reasons. Or if it's a highly innovative one, what does that look like? And we definitely want to negotiate. So when we get into the unreasonable cost scenarios, we definitely want to negotiate for those resources and those monies. So let's take this all back now and put it back into our case study. So if you remember our case study from the first session, Acme Corporation's decided to sell off its rocket-powered roller skate division, and we've decided to relocate the remaining divisions. And the reasons for this was we're going from a much larger organization to a smaller organization. We need less office space, so there's some opportunities here to save money. So the purpose of our project now is really like to go back to what is the purpose of the project. And I'd like you to think about my story at the beginning of our time today when I talked about the fundraising event that my wife and I are organizing. And the purpose of that project was to raise money for our CSA. And anything that we need to do needs to make sure that there's a return back. And I remember an observation that Dolores said years ago. There's in the community that I live in the little village, we have an annual festival, the Salamander Festival, and part of it is they have a bake sale to raise money for the local community planning organization. It helps fund the festival and things. So we used to diligently, bake a pie or, put something into the bake sale. And then one day she went over, she put her thing out there, and it cost us about $7 to make the pie or whatever, let's say, and they were selling it for $5. And she came back and said, why am I bothering? I mean, here we've just put in more money to generate less money. We'd be further ahead to just give them the money, right? And that doesn't even bring into account the labor. So you really want to be very focused back on what is the purpose of this project. And in our case study, the purpose of the project is to reduce dollars, is to reduce money, to reduce overhead. Which means if I have done my analysis and I say, okay, well, my current lease is, let's say, $10,000 a month. And, we're going to move to, let's say, a $9,000 a month lease, but it's going to cost me $100,000 to do the move. Well, simple math here, folks. It's going to take me 100 months to get my return on my investment. So now I need to need to look at and say, okay, are we going to be in this office for 100 months? Or are we going to be in it for 50 months and be moving on, right? So you really want to kind of, think in those terms. And that's why I brought up the previous slide here, earlier slide. Let's go back. All right, why aren't you moving? There we are. Bring up that slide when we look at the life cycle of the product. So how long is this product going to be with us? How much time do I have to gain that benefit back? So in my simple scenario where I'm saving $1,000 a month in rent, is the life cycle of the product going to be long enough for me to gain back enough money to justify the cost of the project? And this is really what we're talking about. So the other purposes of so the main purpose of the project is reduce dollars. But we also need to now also think about what are some of the peripheral costs that might be involved, like interruption operations. So while I might not have a direct cost to the project, i.e., I'm gonna shell out $20,000 to the movers and $50,000 to the renovators and $10,000 to the lawyer and all this kind of stuff. But what about the interruption to operations? I might have a huge, very disruptive move, and now I've got a bunch of people who are not being productive for months. Where customers aren't being served, things like that, right? And you also want to consider any time you're doing a change, and we talked about this in one of our previous webinars where we talked about people's levels of productivity through disruptive change. So we really also want to consider, how can we help our staff with this transition? You look at some of the top stressors in your life. So when you look at all the stuff that you face over a lifetime, and right up there in the top three: death of a loved one, death of a spouse, new job, and moving. Moving is a huge, huge stressor for people. And it's, you want to really help your staff through that transition. People get very attached to their workspaces. You consider you're spending probably the majority of your waking hours in any one place. Well, it's your office is where you're spending that time, right? So people get very, very attached and personal to those places. So you want to really help them make that transition and make that move. And I'm sure many of you have war stories of both good moves and bad ones. I know I sure do. All right, so let's tie this back into a little bit more technical stuff. At the end of our last session, we had built our Gantt chart. So I've got our Gantt chart up here, and what I've put below it is a simple spreadsheet. And again, this is our case study for our discussions. So I'm looking at, what are some of the expenses? We've got labor, materials, equipment, the classic three. And then things like movers and contractors, because we're going to be hiring movers to move all this stuff. So classic office move. We pack everything into boxes, and then the movers come and move all the boxes, and then the people unpack them, and and then we've got our contractors coming in to do a bunch of renos and so forth. So taking each cost for each one of those activities, which is represented in our Gantt, and then laying that out. So really, this is really quite simply a case of, let's take the estimated cost for each of those activities and let's put them onto our Gantt chart. And now we have our cost over time. I've added an extra row down the bottom there, which is cumulative total. So that's just taking the individual period total, which is the line above, and just cumulatively adding it up. So 4 and 4 is 8, add another 2 and that becomes 10, another 5, 15, and so on, right? So, I mean, if you can't do this in simple Excel, you've got some bigger issues here. So the last piece that I would add, and this is actually jumping forward a couple steps, is an actual line. So now that I have these numbers, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick chart of those numbers. So I've just charted the cumulative total. This is your S-curve. This is where your S-curve comes from. And honestly, folks, it is that simple. I mean, the more I look at this, the more I'm going, wow, I used to be scared of this. I used to, shy away from it because I'm not really a big numbers guy. And I just look at this and going, okay, well, this is actually really simple to do. And now that you have that, you've actually got a really good flow of money over time to track my progress. So now, not only can I have good, effective communication to my senior management to say, here's how much money it's going to cost to run this project as a whole. In this case, I'm looking at a 12-month project. But also, here's how much money it's going to cost for each month. So month 1, month 2, month 3. And now, going back to one of the answers earlier where someone said you got to be super vigilant on the numbers and the flow of money, now you've got an actual gauge that you can flow it against. And I see this happening in the real world where people come up with an estimate for the project, and they say, okay, my project's going to be $150,000, but that's the only number that they've come up with. They haven't come up with the number for each month, and then hence the cumulative. So the only way you can know if you're over budget is by actually finishing the project. With this S-curve, you'll actually have indicators, month 2, month 3, month 4, in the first quarter of your project, you'll know whether you're ahead or behind and by how much. And we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail when we get into execution. Actually, we'll start to look at a little bit more detail in the baselining piece, and then we'll bring that into execution as well. We're going to go into earned value management and really looking at some of those details. So to wrap this up, here are some of the key points that we've talked about today. First of all, single-digit budgets cannot be tracked. And by a single digit, what I'm talking about is a single number. So I'm talking about, if I just back up for a second, my budget for this project is $121,000. Well, I can't track that. There's nothing to track. What I need is a series of numbers over time, right? And hence our second point is the baseline is the flow of money over time. So this way I can look at it and say, okay, well, month 1, month 2, month 3, how are we doing? And that can be done monthly, it can be done quarterly, whatever makes sense for you and your environment. And just to kind of tie it back to that first point, let's assume for a moment we're going to do quarterly reporting. I've got the $121,000 for my project. Simply dividing by 4 doesn't work, right? I mean, take a look at the shape of this curve. If I divide by 4, for the first half of my project, I'm going to be grossly under budget. I'm probably going to re-baseline it, and then suddenly I'm over, right? You really got to understand the flow of the money over time, what that looks like. Investments during planning often pay off during execution. Yeah, can't state that one enough. And then ask yourself, what are the key success factors for your project? And the answer is not always money, okay? So, think about what are those key success factors. Talk with your sponsor, talk with your senior management, make that an open discussion, work with them. All right, so to round this out, a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. There's actually a lot of wisdom in that because how we measure things, how much it actually does cost versus the the hidden cost, because there's full cost accounting, which is you actually track every single dollar that's incurred by the project, both the direct and indirects. No one does that, honestly. There's not a lot of benefit in it. We can get close to full cost accounting by looking at our direct costs, but we also want to be thinking about, for every dollar I spend, am I getting a return back? So again, in that simplified example, when we looked at this really cool promotional idea, we kind of looked at it and said, I'm not seeing the dollars back. I'm not seeing how this is going to increase our revenue in. We're looking at spending about $100. It won't increase our revenue in by $100 or more, especially on the short term. So then we got into a discussion of, do we want to make this a one-time event or an annual event, and so on. So we're still kind of hashing that through a little bit. But what is the real value of money? What is the real cost? And most importantly, what is the real benefit?